All his life, Larry has dreamed of having a waterfront home. The 50-year-old loved fishing and couldn't think of anything more relaxing than taking a boat out on the sea, grabbing a pole, sticking it in the water, and fishing for his lunch. So, in 2019, he decides to build his dream home in Satilla Shores. It was supposed to be a nice break from his home in Douglas, Georgia, where he lives with his family and owns a construction company. But that is not what it became. It would eventually mutate into a catalyst for fear, paranoia, and hate. Speaking of catalysts, in 2019, Gregory McMichael got suspended again for not keeping up with his HSI training hours for 2018. When he returned, he was moved to a non-officer position, and then later that year, in June, his retirement was politely suggested. Gregory got the hint and then officially retired. To say it was devastating would be an understatement. Ever notice when you meet someone new, they tend to identify themselves by their occupation? It was not different for Gregory. For most of his life, he was defined by his job. And with that more or less being taken from him, is it possible to die from shame? As Gregory sits in his car at what used to be his employee parking spot, he focuses on the boxes in the back seat. Then he grips the steering wheel tight and contemplates his place in the world and the totality of his failures. Over the last few years, he feels that he has slowly lost pieces of his manhood. The 2 heart attacks and colon surgery were a blow to his vitality. His inability to properly take care of his wife when she got cancer, and of course filing for bankruptcy, was nothing less than an admittance that he has failed to properly plan for his family's financial future. Couple all that with the fact that some of the cases he worked on may have to be retried because he had no right to make any arrests. Not to mention all those side looks and snickers from fellow cops have been painful to ignore. Of course, when he screwed up again, that would be the last straw. Jackie tried to help him. She was a good friend. So, he had no bad feelings towards her. But what could he say to his neighbors? He liked being the cop in the neighborhood, the one they looked up to, the guy they came to with concern. They even bought him Christmas gifts. Better spend this. Better spin it. Gregory rehearses his script out loud. I want more quality. I wanted to spend more quality time with my wife. You know she had cancer, right? I wanted to enjoy every moment with her. We're having a cookout this weekend. Y'all invited. Come on down. That takes care of his neighbors. What about his family? Should he tell them he's just on leave? And then he'll just say he decided not to return. That could work. But then Gregory frowns and realizes that it actually won't work. It's got to be the same story for everyone. Develop a story and treat it as gospel, right? Or maybe he'll just admit he felt unappreciated and wanted to spend the rest of his days with people who didn't mock him, with people who appreciated him. So he accepted the retirement. By October 25th, 2019, Larry had already started construction on his dream house, when all of a sudden, he was alerted by motion-activated cameras that someone was going on the construction site of his house. Larry called and texted the local police to investigate. But once the police responded, nothing had been taken. No one was found on the property. There was nothing for the cops to do. 1 month later, on November 17th, 2019, it happened again. Since others haven't been able to reach Ahmaud, his best friend Akeem Baker gave it a shot. The guys had met in 2nd grade. Akeem remembers desperately wanting to be Ahmaud's friend because Ahmaud was so friendly. So Akeem devised a plan. They both live in the same apartment building and took the bus together. Akeem decided he would ease Ahmaud into a friendship with snacks. It worked. It was a mutually beneficial friendship. Akeem always had Ahmaud's back, and Ahmaud always pushed Akeem to do his best. He told him the hard truth, whether he wanted to hear it or not. And when he started to slack off, Ahmaud would hold him accountable. And that's exactly what happened. Akeem would end up at the prestigious Morehouse College, a historically black college with a rich legacy and an alumni that includes Martin Luther King Jr., Spike Lee, and Samuel L. Jackson. Ahmaud was thrilled for his best friend, but now Akeem wanted to see the same for his friend. But it would never happen if he keeps getting in trouble. You always have less time than you think. Time would tell if Akeem was able to get through. Gregory McMichael was not enjoying his retirement. He would spend the next few months around home. He worked out of his garage and spent some time with Travis, but it was a difficult transition to retirement. Gregory struggled to let go of parts of his past life. Indeed, he still kept his service weapon. Days would come and go, and Gregory often found himself getting lost for weeks at a time doing nothing of real value. And the respect he once garnered slowly depleted. It was a subtle thing. Maybe one less person waves at you when you drive by, or perhaps your family members make a snide comment in passing. His worst nightmare had begun. That is until December 8, 2019, when a neighbor reported that rifles were stolen from an unlocked car. Having something stolen is nerve-wracking in any situation, especially in a neighborhood with a low crime rate. But when the stolen items are firearms, it can truly shatter the nerves of a community. Inexplicably, the wind around the nearby Hoffel-Brofield plantation seemed to almost become aggressive in its manifestations, to the point where dogs refused to go anywhere near it. You could hear them whine if their owners brought them in its vicinity. Even stranger, it was only at that location. It could be sunny everywhere else, but on that plantation, a dark cloud hovered. Perhaps spirits that had long laid dormant had finally awakened. Once Gregory found out about Larry's trespassing situation, he started making phone calls to everyone. And I do mean everyone. He then started putting up notices, pretty much doing anything to alarm everyone that an intruder has breached into their property. And he was not going to allow any of his neighbors to live in fear. Gregory was having none of it. He demanded everyone be super diligent for themselves, as well as their neighbors. He was essentially whipping them up into a state of hysteria. But that's just my opinion. His son saw something different. Travis saw the father that had lost sense of purpose, now excited at having the chance to do something that mattered. He would back his dad up in every way. Plus, he always sensed his dad wanted him to be a cop too. It was never said outright, but the hurt of a son rejecting his dad's life's work was obvious every so often. There was a chance for them to solve a crime together, and Travis kind of suspected it was no one they knew, which was his way of saying the thief probably had a tan and lived on the other side. Larry English kept getting notifications about strangers at his construction site. On one occasion, he remembered seeing some black guy checking out his place. He is pretty sure it wasn't the first time. Larry was starting to wonder what kind of paradise he was building his dream house in. He continued bringing these concerns up to the police. So on December 20th, 2019, Robert Rash, a Glenn County police officer, and one of the few cops that still respected Gregory, did something that emboldened Gregory even more. The officer actually texted Larry English that if he has any more problems, he should just call his old buddy, Gregory McMichael, who was a former cop. Rash's exact words were, "Your neighbor at Satilla Drive is Greg McMichael. Greg is a retired law enforcement and also a retired investigator from the DA's office. He said, please call him day or night when you get action on your camera." Yeah, that was a dereliction of duty. Speaking of his time as a cop, after stupidly being deputized by Officer Rash, Gregory dug up his old service weapon. He thought maybe he'll finally get a chance to use it. His hunch was starting to look more probable, because unsettling the neighbors even more was another incident on December 28, 2019. It was simply labeled as a theft by police. This is when Gregory decided to grab his gun and go on foot patrol around the neighborhood. And then finally on January 1st, 2020, Travis McMichael reported that a firearm was stolen from his truck. Who keeps stealing these weapons, and what are they planning on doing with them? This was the last straw. This needed to end now. All these events were starting to build a palpable fear in everyone, and the conclusion that most people in Satilla Shores made was that this has to be related to someone on the other side of that freeway. The community started a Facebook page to report and communicate with each other. Each neighbor would keep an eye out, but it was expected that the McMichaels would lead any hunting parties. The McMichaels and a few other neighbors started having 6-hour patrolling shifts. Gregory patrolled his territory even late at night. He'd watch the borders of Satilla Shores and stay across the freeway and deep into Fancy Bluff, looking for strange shadows. Was he hoping no one would cross over, or hoping someone would? Back at Satilla Shores, there was a feeling that all these crimes were leading up to something big. Something big happened around 7:30 p.m. on February 11th, 2020. Travis was on his shift patrolling the neighborhood when, as he drove by Larry English's construction site, he saw a stranger. A neighbor named Diego Perez suddenly shows up. Perez claims that Larry English sent him security cam footage and asked him to check it out because Larry had noticed the same man on his property before. Although later it would be revealed that Perez practically begged Larry to come over and check things out. Anyway, Perez armed himself and drove by, and as he did, he saw Travis. It was all piss and vinegar as he ran up and confronted the stranger. But the stranger then reached into his waistband, making Travis pause, wondering if the stranger had a gun. That pause was enough time for the stranger to run into the unfinished house and likely out the other exit. Travis left, but quickly returned with his dad, Gregory, who arrived carrying a gun. Travis then called 911. Anyway, when the cops showed up, the stranger was gone. Nothing was damaged or taken, so it was not reported as a burglary. How did Travis describe this stranger? He says the guy stood about 5 feet 10 inches tall, had short dreadlocks, and looked like he had tattoos on his arm. He was a slender build and appeared to be a light-skinned black man. Let's be honest. Travis probably substituted the phrase light-skinned black man for another word. And he says the guy was wearing a red shirt and white pants. All three men agreed that it was a scary situation, and they are grateful they were not harmed. The other thing they all agreed upon is that they wish the guy hadn't gotten away. For the record, this description of the guy does not seem to match up with Ahmaud. Since we're on the topic of Ahmaud, the issues continued until his mom had a no-nonsense come-to-Jesus moment with him. This strong black woman has seen enough. This isn't the plan. This is not what she wants for him. A life of chance and risk. Ahmaud's years of complacency and recklessness were going to stop. Period. Ahmaud started to really look at his life and where it was going. Perfect timing, too, because his probation would end this year. That probation has been a ball and chain always weighing down his hopes and ambitions. And so, to the relief of both family and friends, he re-enrolled at South Georgia Technical College. He was finally putting it all together. Mob mentality, also called herd mentality, describes how humans adapt behaviors, buy merchandise, follow trends, based on their circle of influence. It explains how one's point of view can easily be shaped by others. After the altercation at Larry's construction site, there was a lively and emotional community meeting. It was as if an amphetamine had been released into the room, putting everyone on edge. Antisocial shut-ins, was suddenly comfortable surrounded by strangers. People who would not normally raise their voices were shouting